Classic literature and even pop culture is full of stories about heroes. Heroes who save the world, heroes who save a life, heroes who save the day, and heroes who do ordinary things. When the topic of a hero comes up, you usually think of someone like Superman, someone who swoops in and saves the day, makes everyone feel secure, and is otherwise the shining beacon of hope. Or someone like Aragorn, whose leadership and determination are the perfect representation of classical heroism. But those towering beacons of justice and strength are not the only kinds of heroes there are, and you're probably thinking of some categories right now. They usually do outshine their brethren because they're easy to create and appeal to idealistic fantasies. That isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I think if that's all you view as a hero, then you're shorting yourself on some really good fiction. I might be a bit unusual. In opposition to the ideal fantasy of saving the world from danger, destroying the ultimate evil, or vanquishing dark powers that seek to control the world, I prefer heroism of a more garden variety. To me, heroism has never been in the grand conquest of individuals as much as it has been in the small things they do every day. The ones that show you who they truly are. I think we all know of at least a few showboats and braggarts who would do great things just for the recognition. We know the potential for great glory attracts people who just want the attention. It's easy to fake it for show every now and again. It's hard to commit to doing good deeds every day, especially ones that aren't convenient and won't go noticed or appreciated as much. It's this brand of everyday heroism that first caught my attention. Average people doing good things that most would overlook or not even consider worth their time. And what it led to was actually my preference for characters without crazy powers, and tales of people stopping to do small mundane things to make the world a slightly better place, even at their own inconvenience. And ultimately, it evolved into my love of tales of unheroic people doing heroic things, both great and small. And now that brings us all the way to the topic of the video. The pathetic hero, an unheroic, weak, or cowardly character held back by themselves, by life, and by insurmountable circumstances. I know that descriptor may not sound like a very appealing sales pitch, but it's not so much that as where it can go. That is why I like these sorts of things. Like I said, I like characters without crazy powers. Characters who are just your average person, unblessed by a god, great power, or gift of nature, who overcomes through sheer tenacity and determination. I like that sort of self-made aspect to them. The pathetic hero is a trope with two renditions in my observations. The first is, as I've mentioned, someone without powers, someone no more than your average man. Well, no power whatsoever is a bit harsh, but I initially coined the term for the idea of a character who deviates from your normal kind of full good character who you would expect out of a shonen, the likes of which have otherworldly strength and choose to use it for good. What I generally refer to as a weak character is someone whose level of power is not very fit for handling the challenges presented to them. They're far outclassed in terms of strength by the broader cast of the series, and there's not real potential for them to match the enemy when the time comes. So, unlike you would expect with a more regular heroic tale, the main character does not receive some kind of miraculous power-up to help them face the final villain. They're consistently a sideshow when it comes to actual fights with this rendition, and they often rely on borrowing the strength of others to conduct their battles. It's not so much that they won't fight, but that they're not actually built for the fights they take on. The other version of the trope is to cripple the character through fear, to where it's not necessarily the fact that they're weak, but that they perceive themselves as weak and it holds them back. This one is pretty straightforward. Them getting over their own fear is the biggest challenge they'll face. Having the ability to do something is one thing, but being able to take action is an entirely different aspect of a fight. A coward who is forced to face their fears is nothing new, so this really should come as no surprise that they exist. After all, there are plenty of soft people out there who may have the strength to deal with certain situations, but would run and hide in fear of their own lives, or just wouldn't interact at all for fear of their inconvenience. But I hope you see what I'm saying. A coward and a weakling wouldn't exactly be expected to hold their own in a fight. One would turn and run, while the other wouldn't be able to do much at all. Wait, if a character can't or won't fight and isn't expected to win in any confrontation, doesn't that defeat the purpose of having them be the main character? If you want to look at it through the lens of traditional heroism only, technically yes. But you see, that's the great part about these types. It takes someone most would judge as unfit to be the centerpiece of their own story, and shows how they can overcome even their greatest flaws. If you think about it, that's what heroism is about, overcoming obstacles to save the day, even if you yourself are the obstacle. It's one thing to run into a fight knowing you have the enemy outgunned, and that you won't be hurt by what they're packing. Power and strength breed a security of mind in those situations that helps people feel confident. That's why people usually don't pick fights with others who they assume would make easy work of them. It is a hardwired survival mechanism that takes loose screws or guts to overcome. That's not to say that traditional heroes don't have struggles. They do, and some of them are still really good. The challenge of being Superman is the temptation to become authoritarian. Most people given that level of power would likely seek to take over the world, but Superman doesn't, and he uses it simply to save the day. The challenge of being someone given the opportunity to hone their strength to be a hero, like Naruto or Asta, is mastering the power. It takes work and determination to reach the levels of power they did, and not many people would dedicate themselves enough to actually achieve that. And the challenge of the pathetic hero is to know in every situation that it is out of your depth, and still take that step forward, making the active choice to brave death and harm regardless. It is the story of the average man running into a burning building to save someone. Honestly, this is the greatest example of courage you can depict in fiction, if you ask me. The average man standing up to the impossibility of the world around him and doing all that he can to fight back against it. This is the kind of thing I love the pathetic hero for. An otherwise uninspiring person being given the chance to shine, to demonstrate that they aren't just weak or cowardly, and finding a way to win even in impossible situations. As an example, let me talk to you a bit about a little-known anime called One Punch Man. Everyone likes to talk about the multitude of cool, high-powered characters fighting monsters in this series, or about Fubuki's personalities. And there's certainly no shortage of likable characters in this series for a variety of more or less understandable reasons. But you know who my favorite has always been? Moomin Rider. Look, I will die on this hill that this guy deserves some credit for charging into a fight he just watched an S-class hero lose. I think Moomin Rider is an excellent depiction of the spirit of the pathetic hero, the underdog aspect innate to them. Though, in this particular case, he lost that fight and was saved by Saitama right at the end. But it was never about that. It was about the courage in the face of an obviously impossible situation. Honestly, of all the things in One Punch Man that stuck out to me, this one has been in my mind the most since I first watched the series. I think another good example of what can be done with the pathetic hero lies in characters like Stark of Freerun, who consistently overcomes his fears of danger and harm to fight for those at his side, even against monsters who would and could stand up against the world's most legendary heroes. Zenitsu is also a good example. As much as the constant use of the crutch of his passing out annoys me, I particularly liked his fight in the latter part of the series where, in spite of having been a coward throughout the entire series who would beg not to be sent into battle, he becomes uncharacteristically noble towards the end, choosing to take on a more gifted opponent than himself out of a sense of duty and reverence to the master who trained him. But I think there is one who encapsulates the true courageous underdog spirit of the pathetic hero more so than any other character I've mentioned or that I could mention. Subaru Natsuki. Is this motherfucker seriously talking about Subaru again? What is your problem, dude? Why are you obsessed? I know I've made a decent few videos talking quite a bit about the character, but that's because I find so many angles by which to view and interpret his actions and himself that are just so fitting. And in this one, it happens to be that Subaru is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. The boy wholly unfit to be a hero. The boy disastrously out of his league in every situation. And the hero nobody expects to save the day each and every time, yet everyone looks to when things get rough. The story of Subaru Natsuki is one of a guy desperately butting his head against a brick wall until something breaks. Generally, it's Subaru himself to break first, but he never fails to find his way back around and overcome every last problem laid out before him. With Subaru, there's an interesting dynamic because death isn't necessarily the end of the line for him. His power, returned by death, gives him the unique opportunity to face every situation again and again until he reaches the resolution he desires. That doesn't negate the courage he displays because he can just revive and do it again though. To face death again and again, to walk into danger and harm every time determined to save people, to face unbearable pain and frustration of failure on repeat, all of that counts for something. But the power effectively allows him to choose which kind of life he will lead, while simultaneously placing the burden of everyone's lives on his shoulders. It is his decision, and his alone, whether others will live or die. And he is forced to actively choose the hard path through life if he wants to protect the people he cares about. He is not fit for the battles ahead of him that he will be forced to face if he wants these people to live. And yet, he chooses to face each and every battle until he overcomes them for the sake of others. That kind of courage isn't an average thing. It isn't the usual. A lot of people in Subaru's position would likely grow frustrated at the impossibility of the tasks they had to deal with and run away, ultimately concluding that fate ordained the people around them to die and that there was nothing they could do. Now, I know you're probably thinking, I'd never be so heartless, but how many times could you stand to be ripped apart while still kicking and screaming? How many times could you face the psychological stress of death? How many times could you repeat the same set of circumstances and fail before eventually deciding there was nothing you could do? How long would you be willing to suffer before you chose your own comfort? I think this is an aspect of the whole series that doesn't get talked about in a clear sense enough. Most people of the modern world would turn a blind eye to even the simplest of things that they could alleviate, even if just temporarily. Not many actually have the strength of mind and heart to truly suffer for the sake of another. That aspect, the self-sacrificing element of giving up on one's own comfort and security to do what's right, is one of the things I think needs to be demonstrated more in fiction, or at least more clearly. I love stories where the world tries to break someone with an impossible situation for them to overcome, trying to force them to back down through sheer suffering and torment, and yet they stand and fight each and every time. They push onward and they win because their own lives do not matter to them in the way that the lives of others do. Or they carry the fight until someone else arrives who can put an end to it. That's the reason why I like this sort of story. It's ultimately the story of pretty average people overcoming great obstacles, of people setting their own flaws and concerns aside to be heroes. And I find that to be a very compelling tale. It's a message that even the average person can do great things if they're willing to. You don't need to be born special. You don't need to have some amazing power. You don't even need some special training. All you need to do is be courageous and selfless. This was effectively the core of even some great works like Lord of the Rings, where one of the central heroes of the story is just an ordinary hobbit named Frodo Baggins. He may not be anyone's favorite character, but he is one of the most pivotal characters. He, and the other hobbits for that matter, was by no means some great hero the way many in the Fellowship were, like Aragorn or Legolas or Gandalf. But he shouldered the burden of the One Ring and carried it all the way to Mount Doom, where fortune would see it destroyed by the end of the series. And while Tolkien himself said in his letters that Frodo himself had failed to destroy the ring, it must not be understated that without him, the war would have gone much differently. No race was as suited for the task as the hobbits were, and not every hobbit was as suited as Frodo was. But even then, given the scale of the battle and the monumental task before him, not many would have expected hobbits to triumph over one of the greatest evils of Middle-earth. Just because Frodo was uniquely suited to bear the ring doesn't make him particularly special. It wasn't like he could fight in the war. It wasn't like he was skilled with a sword or had some secret magic that he could use. All he did was carry the ring. So in short, I love the message it all presents. The idea that everyone has the power within them to do something good and something great. The idea that you can run into the burning building and save someone. You do not need to have some special protection to do so. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to be special. None of those things are what makes someone a hero. So loosen a few screws, grow yourself a spine, and go do something good today. Later.